All right, I think we can get started here and we'll just let people sign on as they join. Hi, everyone. I'm Josh Goldberg. I'm the president of the Sports, Entertainment, Fashion, Art Law Society at FIU Law. Thank you all for being with us here today for our first ever symposium. It's been an eventful week, so thank you for joining us to close it out strong. I'd like to thank my entire executive board for helping put this together. There was a lot of work that went in behind the scenes to help put this on virtually, so thank you. And I'd like to thank our panelists, Savannah, Hannah, and Samantha for joining us here today. Thank you so much. I'll now hand it over to Daria Masudi, who's the vice president of our club, and she'll introduce the panelists.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here with us today. So I'm just going to introduce, we're going to start off with Hannah. So Hannah Gordon is the CAO she's general counsel of the 49ers, and she earned her JD from Stanford Law. In her current role as a chief administrative officer and general counsel for the San Francisco 49ers, Hannah has negotiated over $1 billion in sponsorship and broadcast agreements for Levi's Stadium while leading the team's community efforts, which resulted in an ESPN Humanitarian Team of the Year award. We also have Savannah Foster, and she is a certified NFL agent and vice president of client relations at Athletes First. This past NFL draft, Savannah had her first client selected in the first round, Miami Dolphins offensive tackle Austin Jackson. And lastly, we have Samantha Sankovic, and she is a certified NFL agent and vice president of football operations at Steinberg Sports and Entertainment. So Samantha represents NFL running backs, Kareem Hunt and James Robinson, as well as many others. And we're going to hear from all of them today so they can give you a little bit more about their background. So thank you all for being here. We're super excited. Samantha, drive safe wherever you are. So we're going to start off, Hannah, I'm going to start it off with you, and because Hannah is an attorney. And so what inspired you to become a sports law attorney? And then for Savannah and Samantha, why did you want to become an NFL agent, or was that always not the plan? So Hannah, we'll just start it off with you.
Sure. Hey, everybody. I hope you're doing well. I know that it's hard to do law school remotely, or I imagine it would be. So I have a lot of empathy for all of you. I, as you said, went to Stanford for law school. I had worked in sports before I went to law school. So for me, I always knew going to law school that I wanted to get back into sports and that it was just a path for doing that. I had worked at the NFL Players Association. I'd worked in college football, and I had worked at a sports agency. And so when I went to law school, my focus was on becoming a general counsel at a team and studying how could I do that. And that's how I ended up here.
Thank you. Anyone, Savannah, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, I always wanted to be an NFL agent, but if I'm honest, I think there were definitely points in my life where I started to doubt if that might be a possibility. So I went to college at the University of Louisville, and whenever I was in school, my advisor for my sorority told me, if you want to be an agent, you have to move to California or New York, which absolutely is 100% false, but I didn't know any different, and I'm glad I listened to that advice. So I moved to California without knowing a soul, and just kind of started pounding the pavement, trying to find the best opportunities to align me to where I wanted to be. So I ended up finding an opportunity as a receptionist at Athletes First in 2008, and the rest is history. So I've been here my entire career in professional sports. And, starting as receptionist, I also worked in client relations, and I was assistant to the president of our firm. And then it was 2013, I decided, I don't want to be complacent. I want to continue to level up my skills and give more to the agency and our clients. So I sat for the agent exam in 2013 and have been an agent. That's a lie. Since 2016, I'm sorry. And then have been an agent ever since. And then, like you mentioned, had my first round client last year. Also kind of help out on a recruiting team. So hitting the road with a lot of the other agents as they have their different recruiting visits throughout the year. So I love what I do. I'm thankful to do it. Absolutely. And, it was always a dream of mine, and being able to live in this space, I'm incredibly thankful for sure.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, I'm Samantha, work at Steinberg Sports and Entertainment. And as you guys can see, would have been behind the desk, but it's pro day today. So we got to be where the guys are. So I'm currently sitting outside the indoor facility in tropical Blacksburg, Virginia today. So I have always wanted to be an agent. Grew up in sports. I just thought that you had to have your law degree, which obviously that pertains to many of you on this call. But technically you don't. You can have your master's too. So I started out in the agency world after going to the University of Miami, up in New York, and then I flipped the script, went brand side, worked for Under Armour for about 6 years, and then I was like, you know what, this is really pulling at the heartstrings. And I had a mutual friend who was looking to expand his agency, and business was kind of booming at the time. So brought me in as the head of marketing and PR for the guys there. And basically the first conversation was, you know, you have great resume, you know, you seem like a boss lady. Layman's terms. Have you ever wanted to become an agent? I said, absolutely. Again, thought you had to have the law degree. It's like, no, master's is cool. So I sat for my test 2017, and we've been off to the races since. Just a side note, we were PFS agency, East Coast based out of Baltimore. And now we merged with Steinberg. So we are both West Coast and East Coast.
Awesome. Well, thank you for, yeah, go ahead.
Say one funny connection point to Savannah and Samantha in terms of how we got here. When I was graduating from college, which is before either of them went to work where they were, I actually interviewed to be a receptionist at Athletes First. They were like, oh, we'd like to hire you, but we just got sued by Steinberg and there was a $40 million judgment.
Oh, yeah.
Not hiring this position anymore. So I could have ended up somewhere knowing one or both of you, but just a funny how all of our little paths go in their own directions.
Mhm.
I'm so glad you didn't take it, or I probably wouldn't be here today.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so as you guys know, today the title of our panel is "You Negotiate Like a Girl," and so it's awesome to have women in this field. It's usually dominated by men, as you know, everyone knows. So Hannah, we'll start off with you. Did you ever feel intimidated by an industry dominated by men, or were you kind of always comfortable with what you could bring to the table? You were very confident in what you knew, and yeah. So we'll start off with that.
I don't think the industry doesn't intimidate you. It's just individual interactions or situations that you may be in that make you feel less than, or that make you question yourself in some way. I think I am blessed that I had a lot of self-confidence, and I always knew I was smart. Like, that was the part where I was like, you can't fool me on that part. Like, I'm not stupid. Like, that part we've got down. But that doesn't mean, even if you know that about yourself, that doesn't mean that you won't be in situations that aren't uncomfortable. And so I think having also just a strong sense of self around like what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior, and what kind of people do you want to be around. I think that, and knowing how to use your voice, knowing how to let people know, sometimes through humor, sometimes through other means, like if their behavior is something that is unacceptable. So I would say, no, I mean, I never felt like, oh, I don't belong here. I might've felt like a lot of other people don't belong. I mean, been like, oh, y'all don't belong. Like, you need to go. But yeah, I would say that's how I think about it.
Whoever can speak next. Savannah, if you want to go.
Okay, sure. Sorry, I didn't know if you were calling people. Yeah, no, I completely agree with everything she said. And I think the biggest thing for me is finding a supportive network. Hannah alluded to it a little bit, but all of the people that I work with on a daily basis are my continual support in everything that I do. So having people around me to uplift me and kind of help bolster that confidence in myself has been instrumental to my success to this point. And I know I probably wouldn't be here today without all of that support. So I think, she mentioned it, but it is vital as you're thinking about maybe entering a male dominated field to think about creating a system where you feel very supported, because that's been really important for me in my growth.
I definitely agree with that. I actually agree with both fronts. I think having the huge support system and having somebody if you're fresh and you're new, you want somebody to guide the way. Obviously, I think, just knowing that you're able to do the job, very well, better, sometimes in some cases, right, to your male counterparts, and just, just believing in yourself, and, knowing that you're able to get the job done. Sometimes I've talked to a lot of females who have discussed maybe the imposter syndrome, right? Like, do I belong here? Am I doing the right thing? You got to just take it and run with it. And when you have people who support you, like Savannah was saying, you find that you're not really feeling that way at all.
Definitely. So just following up with that, did you, because you're a woman in a field of, sports is dominant, it's, most dominated by men, do you ever feel the need to dress or to look a certain way to fit in? Did you ever feel like you had to wear a coat or a blazer in order to set the tone of you are the agent, or you are the attorney who are representing these clients and these players, and like, how have you, and if you haven't seen that, you speak about maybe how you've seen in the industry from your own experience, how it's maybe evolved and maybe you're not treated like that anymore?
I'll take this one. I think Hannah obviously lives in a little bit of a different space than Samantha and I, but it's incredibly casual what we do. And I think players would probably be like alarmed if I were to show up like looking dressed up, like, am I in trouble? Like, what's going on? Like, what's happening here? Because, most of the time, 95% of what we do is when players are working out or they're rehabbing or therapy, they're in sweats. So we're a continuation of their family. We're great support for the players and their families as well. So we're always just casual, relational. And from my perspective, I've never felt any particular way about needing to level up or dress a certain way. It's actually kind of opposite than what I would have anticipated getting into the industry, because it's incredibly casual. And I think people would raise an eyebrow if I were to show up in a dress or heels most of the time, because at the office on a typical day, we're wearing sweats or Lululemon. So it was a perk of the job that I didn't know was a perk of the job when I took it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, I'm sitting here outside of a pro day in a camo jacket and a black top, and it's not to say that you don't want to look presentable, obviously, when you're out in public. That's not the case at all. Again, to Savannah's point, you can dress casual. Trendy would be a good word too, when you're in front. I think combine, if you're meeting with GMs, I tend to just up it a little bit. Maybe, I'm wearing my black blazer, not my camo blazer, but I'm not wearing a 3-piece suit at all. And I don't, luckily, again, for us women, I don't think that that's the case now, as you tend to kind of go towards the more female side of my, this conversation again comes up. Am I wearing, enough? Is this okay? Is this, a lot of the old school thinking is, oh, it's distracting. They got to get over it. It's I've never seen any of my counterparts out here, and I'm speaking for myself, Savannah, Nicole, a bunch of other females agents, nobody's shown up in what some people would label provocative, and it's just it's your job, it's business. And I don't think that's the case, but luckily for us, again, no suits are needed. So thumbs up on that one.
All right. Well, from the corporate perspective, yes, on suits. If you're in a team environment, in terms of changing how you dress, definitely when I was younger and I worked at the league office, because, how one dresses is cultural, right? So all of it is sending cultural symbols to other people. And then what makes it incredibly complicated is that we have all been taught a different set of cultural symbols based on geography, based on gender, based on generation that we grew up in. And so, for example, when I worked at the league office in New York, it was much more formal. They had a formal dress code, and I found myself as the only woman in a department, like almost trying to dress like the men. Like I started wearing like button down shirts and trousers. Like there was a day where I showed up and me and another guy were both in like a blue and white straight button down shirt and like charcoal trousers. And I was like, yes, it's working. Like I'm blending in. But for anyone who's seen My Cousin Vinny, which is like one of my favorite all-time movies, Marissa Tomei, when she's like, yeah, you blend. Like we never blend. We're women. Like yes, we still have breasts and hips and people still see that. Like, and I think in some ways we do ourselves a disservice because we try so hard to not have other people discriminate against us. And ultimately, it's actually not our responsibility to have other people not discriminate against us. And at the same time, we're navigating how do we survive in a world that is discriminatory. And so when I talk to young women, I usually tell them, like, to me, the important thing is that you know what the cultural symbols and language is, and then you can make conscious choices about what language you want to be speaking, what symbols you want to be sending. Because if you want to dress in a way that maybe somebody else finds provocative, that's your choice, but you want to make sure that you know that that's how other people are perceiving you, so that it is actually a choice and not just that you don't know that what you wore in college is not appropriate in the minds of executives to what you wear in a corporate office. So that's how I look at it. But there is, I think, unfortunately, because we live in a misogynistic culture, there is a culture, especially I would say in sports, of talking about what women wear, talking about what they look like, that's really unhealthy and that men and women both often participate in.
That's a really valid point, and it brings up another question that I have you all three have ever experienced maybe like a phone call where they're trying to speak to the player's agent or the attorney, and they hear a woman's voice and they're like, can you please pass the phone to the agent? Am I speaking to the agent? And you're like, oh, I am the agent, or I am representing this client. Have you guys ever had an experience with that?
I had that exact situation happen. I was the only agent in the office one day, and the receptionist answered the phone and someone had cold called asking to speak with a player agent. And so I was here and I took the call, and the man on the line said, oh, you must have misunderstood me. I need to speak with an agent. And, of course, it's incredibly offensive. But for me, I feel like I just kind of need to let it roll because I know who I am and what I'm capable of doing. And as long as my clients know that, that's all that really matters in my mind. So I don't really care too much about public perception, but it is something I've personally encountered before, probably more times than that. But that was a very clear example of that situation happening to me. But I do feel like hopefully it's becoming more rare, as times are evolving and there are much more women in the space than there used to be. So I feel as though things are on the right track for sure.
Yeah, I've definitely gotten the same. There's also been times, Savannah, which I'm sure you might have gotten to, like game days, right? Oh, are you a player wife? Are you a player girlfriend? Things of that nature. You have to be like, no, I'm actually his agent. Did the deal so he could be on the team. But yeah, you definitely get that a lot. It's just because, again, general perception is that an NFL agent is a male, and we're here to break that perception as respectfully as possible.
Okay, well, Josh, I think you're gonna follow up next.
Yeah, sure. Just to switch gears a little bit, I think a lot of us would love to know about your day-to-day life. So I know, Samantha, you're even on the road right now. Maybe you can talk a little bit about life as an agent on the road and traveling the pro days to support your clients. And Hannah, maybe when you can talk a little bit about the difference of your legal work, whether it's in season or off season. Are you busier now? And Savannah, you can add also about your agent life.
Sure. Being an agent's great. Every day is something different. And a huge part of that, like Josh mentioned, is travel. You want to make sure your clients, your players know that they are fully supported, and you can't do it from, the house. And obviously this past year has been very trying with that, travel restrictions and trying to keep yourself safe, your family safe, them safe, things like that. But in a non-COVID world, you are traveling the majority of the year. And it's obviously not just in season going to games and supporting the families that way. Out of season, you're recruiting, you're meeting with families, you're meeting with players, you're going to pro days. So for example, today I had my laptop all set up. I had my nice black blazer, and pro day ran over. Like you don't know what's going to happen a lot of the time, and you have to be extremely flexible too. So, as an agent, you have to understand that you are going to miss family birthdays. You are going to miss weddings, important things that might be going on in your personal life. Sometimes have to take a back seat to what's going on in professional life, because these guys are a priority and they expect to be your priority. Now it's important as an agent, female, male, whatever, to get a good support system behind you. So if you're thinking about this line of work, you got to manage expectations on your back end. Family, friends, significant others, whatever that may be, they'll support you and they want you to succeed. But sometimes, some people might not understand that this is not just a 9-to-5 job. I mean, it's a lifestyle. We're on all the time, 24/7, 365, 3 a.m., 3 p.m. Hopefully it's not 3 a.m., but, and anytime these guys need anything, we're there. A lot of frequent flyer miles, a lot of non-glamorous hotels. Luckily, I'm out of the Baltimore area, so I was able to drive out to Virginia Tech. I have my cohort sitting in the car behind me. He flew from LA to come out here, red eye. So it's very transient. You got to be flexible. You got to like to travel, but you're doing everything for these guys. It's not just on the field contracts too, and you're doing off the field marketing. You're supporting their foundations. You're helping the family with things. It's little to the grandiose. We're taking care of everything, or we have a support system behind us that's helping us take care of everything.
Everything Samantha just said. That was great. And 100% accurate. The only thing I would add to that, which she didn't mention, is what we do is very cyclical. So, the springtime, of course, is very busy as we get the players trained up and ready for the draft. And then the players who are vet players, of course, have their bowl games, hopefully, and make Pro Bowl and then Super Bowl and all of that. If not, they take a little break and then get right back to training. So this time of year is very intense and very hectic. Summer times generally are a little bit slower, but that's when the recruiting really picks up for the next season. So there is no downtime, but what we do, usually 2020 was just a wash all around, but generally we know what to expect based on the month that's coming up. So, summer's a little bit slower, ramp back up whenever guys get into training camp and beyond, and then season's just a total blur. And we have Pro Bowl, Super Bowl, Senior Bowl, Combine, and it's chaos. So, but it is, I think for me, I find solace in knowing that there is a kind of set schedule for each year. We know what to expect. And, you mentioned missing family functions and that sort of thing. We can kind of plan around it a little bit. I would never put, hopefully, a big birthday party or event in February. That would just be catastrophic all around for us. So knowing what to anticipate has been helpful in that regard too.
Yeah, from a team side, it is cyclical, but legal is always busy. You can never predict when people will sue you, or you have litigation that goes on for years, and you can't determine when there's going to be discovery or anything like that. So I'd say always busy, definitely less travel than Samantha and Savannah have, and probably the travel is more predictable and more a choice. I get to choose when and what I want to go to, as opposed to just being I have to always go. Yeah, so I would say it's probably a little bit more 9 to 5 than being an agent, but if the phone rings at 3 in the morning, like Samantha said, you have to answer it.
To follow up with that, what are some of the typical legal challenges that you deal with as a team, whether it's protecting the intellectual property of the team or doing deals for the stadium also?
Yeah, I think there's a misconception around how much IP work teams do, at least in the NFL. I think in MLB and the NBA, teams have a little more leeway in terms of what they do and may do a little bit more of the work at the team level. In the NFL, it all happens at the league level because the league holds all of the trademarks of all the clubs. And for most things, like apparel, for example, all of that licensing happens at a league level. They take care of all trademark registrations. So it's something that you work with them on, but is really a very, very small part of a team portfolio. the majority of most teams' legal work is going to focus on really basic contract work. So your sponsors, your seat agreements, your suite agreements, all of your vendor agreements, and then general business advice for all of your internal clients. And then mentioning litigation, you know, every team generally is going to have a litigation portfolio. It's going to depend on whether or not they manage their own stadium, because events obviously is where most of your litigation is probably going to come from. But you may also have, you know, we have quite a bit of litigation with the municipality that owns our stadium. So it really depends on the team, but I would say a lot of it is like very bread and butter corporate law work.
Thank you. And Savannah, being in Miami, a lot of FIU students are Miami Dolphins fans. So I think we'd love to hear what went into negotiating Austin Jackson's contract last year.
Yeah, well, he's an incredible person, first and foremost. I just want to put that out there. I'm so thankful to be working with him because he genuinely is a great guy and he has an incredible story. I'm not sure if anybody knows too much about him personally, but his sister had a really rare blood disorder and he donated bone marrow for her procedure. And it was just a very selfless act going into his last season at USC. So testament to who he is. But anyways, first round contracts are generally fairly straightforward. Probably not a lot of glitz and glam like you would imagine. I'm sure Samantha can attest to it. But you know, where we really get in and grind our heels into the dirt a little bit is with different language provisions in the contract. So knowing what to look out for and different pitfalls, I guess, that could generally happen within that contract language is vital and key. So we took a lot of time to look at that language to make sure he's entirely protected throughout the duration of his contract. So, you know, since he's a first round pick, it's 4-year with the 5th-year option. So that's pretty straightforward. But the money, we want to make sure that he's making more than the guys behind him, of course, and maxing out the value of his contract. So, you know, put a lot of diligence into it, a lot of research, but the negotiation part of it really wasn't as intense and crazy as you might think. Took a couple of days, again, just kind of honing in on that specific language. Then the rest is history. And so, you know, hopefully he's healthy and able to really make an impact on the team this year. And then when it's time to negotiate his second contract, that's where it's going to get kind of gritty. So we're looking forward to that a couple of years down the line, and we'll have much more leverage and a negotiating ability at that point.
So while the draft pick contracts are slotted, on the flip side, Samantha, last year you represented James Robinson, who was one of the best running backs in the league and went undrafted. Could you take us through how did he end up in Jacksonville and the difference with negotiating an undrafted contract for a free agent?
Sure. So unfortunately, we definitely thought he was getting drafted for sure. You know, mid to late was what he was projected at. He had a pretty good combine. A lot of teams were high on him. So you start getting down to day 2, and then you get into day 3, and it starts getting later and later in day 3. And you're also checking out the trends of who's being taken, you know, what teams need who and things like that. And as you get closer to, you know, 5th, 6th, 7th round, you know, some teams end up with being done in the 5th round, and you're constantly checking that and noting that, and you start making calls. It's a flurry of calls, and throughout the draft process, ideally you're keeping note of who's contacted your guy, in what facet have they contacted them. Has it been a light contact? Has it been full on Zooms? Obviously before COVID stuff, are they, you know, have they worked them out? Have they flown them in for top? It's, you know, it's all different things. So you're keeping track of who's interested and who you've had conversations with. And then you just start getting on the horn and you just start calling teams. Sometimes teams are calling you about guys because they're so excited that they fell and that they don't have to do the extended contracts and all the money. And then, you know, you then negotiate their value. And with James, it was interesting because there were a couple teams who liked him for sure. And we had several teams on the horn, and we ended up picking Jacksonville. You know, it was a good fit for him at the time. We actually sold him a little bit to them, which I don't know if they'll tell you that, but you know, kind of, we knew Fournette was falling off just a little bit from what we had heard within the building. James, they really liked him during the process. He's a tough guy. He's a gritty guy. And so you go through and you essentially, negotiate that contract of that value. It's the end, which I'm sure, again, Savannah can attest to. The end of the draft is crazy with the undrafted free agents, getting them onto teams, getting them locked in, making sure that it's also the right fit and it's not just for the dollar amount too. Obviously, you want to get the most amounts, but you also want to make sure there's longevity with your guys too, and you're not just schlepping them off to somewhere just because. And it all worked out, right?
So I guess next, what has been the most, the proudest case, Hannah, for you? Is there the proudest moment you've had in a case? And Savannah and Samantha, what's the proudest moment you've just had in general as an agent? The most memorable, or the one that's just kind of made you the proudest?
Oh, am I supposed to take that first? I don't think I've ever had a moment in a legal case where I was like, woo, this is the proudest moment in my life. But I will say building Levi Stadium is one of the proudest things in my career. And then going to 2 Super Bowls, I'm excited to win a Super Bowl. I'm trusting and believing that is going to happen. But I will say winning an NFC championship feels pretty awesome. So I would say the 2 of those were probably highlights. And also went to a Super Bowl with the Raiders when I was an intern many, many moons ago. So I guess I would say 2 NFC championships and an AFC championship.
For me, I think it would be, I worked really closely with a Super Bowl MVP a couple of years ago, and being able to be with him and his family on the field as he celebrated that special moment, with the confetti falling down, and being able to kind of see that off season transition into a completely new animal was incredibly fulfilling. So, he went on to do some really, really huge things that off season that kind of set him up for the rest of his career and hopefully even life after football. So being a part of that and being able to see his dreams come to reality right before my eyes was I was very proud. I was like a proud mom in that moment for him and his family.
So I just talked about James Robinson, going from undrafted to RB1 essentially. And how hard these guys work. You see it day in and day out, and essentially you don't recruit them otherwise. That these guys are just workhorses essentially, and they love it and they want to succeed, and you want them to succeed. So for him to be able to be selected for RB1 and then essentially, no pun intended, but take it and run with it, right? That was just like you said, you're like a proud mom, like a proud older sister. It's great when these guys succeed, because I feel like that's what we're in it for. You have this emotional attachment, whether that's the female part of us or just being good at what we do, but there is this emotional attachment to these guys that you genuinely obviously want them to succeed. I'm going to kind of take it reverse though. So Kareem Hunt is one of my clients. And as you guys know, he went through a bunch of stuff basically. And it was a very difficult situation to have him in and to kind of get him maneuvered through. And he had to take some personal steps to be able to get to where he is today, and to be able to stand by his side and help guide him through that, if that makes sense, and be encouraging and know who he is deep down inside, and essentially the rehab of that, and getting him back on a team and seeing him succeed again. That was huge. He is a very genuine dude, with a very loving heart, and we just needed to help show that. And for him, his rehab, back to the Browns. And then, we were at his first game back there, tears everywhere. Myself, my other agent, who's a male counterpart, Kareem with his helmet on. It just was a very blessed feeling. And that's, I think, being able to help these guys when they're at their lowest of the low, essentially, is, it's huge. So that would be one of mine. That's
all awesome stories. I feel like I feel the same way. So Hannah, can you talk about your novel, Season of Change? And then also, when writing that, can you talk about maybe a little bit of, we know we touched on it before, but the growth of women in the industry?
Sure. It's not a novel. It's actually a guided journal. But I'm like, girl, I'm not creative enough to write a novel. But I am able to give you guys the tools that work for me. And that's really why I wrote it. Is so many, young women like you, Daria, were like, okay, I want to get where you are. How do I do that? And so that really made me pause and be like, yeah, how do you do that? And as I looked back, there are a lot of practices that help me, and journaling is one of them, in really specific ways. So there are 3 daily practices that you work up to in the book: setting a focus every day, writing out what your gratitude is, which to me is really like a performance tool, not just like a touchy feely thing, because it puts you in a much more creative mindset. And then what your affirmations, your I am statements are. Because like we were talking about earlier, when you're in an environment where you are different, you have to have a very strong sense of self to survive that environment. And then it's structured in terms of kind of what football has taught me in my life. So we go from like film study, understanding ourselves, to vision, to game plan, to putting together our roster, to reading our clips. How do we take in incoming information and understand what to do with it? Because we're all receiving that all the time, whether it's constructive criticism or bulletin board material or positive feedback. And then how do we make adjustments? Because life does not go according to plan. And how do we then use recovery? Because I think we've really come a long way in sports in the last 20 years in understanding active recovery and understanding to be high performers, we have to have rest and self-care. And then finally practice. So the book is really just designed to be a tool to help you get where you want to go, and figure out where that is.
To follow up with that, for any law students in attendance or just anyone in general, how would you recommend honing your negotiating skills, and what would you say are the do's and do nots of negotiating?
That's a whole class in and of itself. I'm super interested to hear Savannah and Samantha's perspective on that. I did take a negotiation class in law school. I think what was useful about it is that it was hands-on, and every single class was a negotiation exercise in a group, where you were negotiating against other people. And the outcome is something that you never get in real life, which is that then you debrief and find out what other people's goals and their information actually was, which you don't get to do in the real world. And it was really interesting. And one of the things that was most interesting about it is that the class ruined relationships. Because the reality is, if you're an asshole, that will come out in the way that you negotiate, and other people won't like you. And so when you're in a business like sports, I think it's important to understand that pretty much everyone is a repeat player. So when you are in a negotiation, if you're in a situation where the 2 individuals will never meet again, that is a very different negotiation than a negotiation where the people who are negotiating, even if their clients won't necessarily be connected forever, that they are repeat players. That completely changes the nature of the negotiation, because you know that it's actually just one in a series. And so I think in sports, it's really important to understand this is a very relationship-based business. We could go into all sorts of like detail around like anchoring and all the kind of like tactics around negotiation. But that would literally be like a semester-long class. So I will leave it there, because I'm definitely very interested to hear what Savannah and Samantha think as agents on the negotiation question.
Yeah, I think for me, it would be just observing, so luckily I've had the experience here at Athletes First for the past 12 years. I've been able to sit in on rooms and hear firsthand negotiations over this entire time. So for me, I've sat like a sponge and just observed and listened and saw what worked, what didn't work. And just like you mentioned, watch the different personalities kind of emerge and see what's most successful in these negotiation scenarios, and kind of role play with it a little bit. You mentioned practice. We obviously don't get the opportunity to practice a ton, because when we're negotiating, it's for the real deal. So making sure that I'm researched, knowledgeable, of course, but just sitting back and observing the others who've done it way, way ahead of me has been instrumental, again, in my success in this side of the business. Just watching others, taking notes, learning over the years has been really important for me.
I definitely agree with that. I also think too, especially on our side, it's noting who you're negotiating with. You know, specific teams have specific terms. Some teams, you know, structure their contracts different than other teams, and you kind of have to, well, not kind of, you have to look at the precedents of the deals that they've done in the past, who specifically internally has done it. So a lot, you have to do some digging, essentially before you even kind of go off to the races. Managing personalities for sure is one, especially being a female within this. You know, we as females unfortunately get the perspective of being emotional and all this stuff. And I mean, it's very, it has to be very black and white. You know, if you're friendly already with a person, you know, that helps. But, you know, most of the cases, sometimes you're not. And you just got to stand the ground, I think, a little bit more as a female too, setting in these negotiations. And, you know, you got to make sure that you're putting forth the best foot about the value of the clients. And sometimes these teams kind of want to undermine it a little bit, even though they know, even though they know the true value. Sometimes they like to, you know, put some BS in there. But, you know, being able to get their worth, their value, and translate that onto paper and what that looks like for the team in the next 1, 2, 3, 4, even 5 years, right? Something crazy like that. It's very important too. But I think doing your due diligence and researching first a little bit of background is very important too.
Yeah, just one more thing on that. Samantha kind of mentioned it, but we're usually working with the same people on the teams every time we do a negotiation. Generally, it's 1 or 2 people on the team side of things who kind of head up the negotiation efforts. So, you know, researching and making sure we know their negotiation styles and what they typically try to do in a contract. And if they're going to try and put in any kind of language, or if they're going to try and skew it one way or the other, knowing that and anticipating that helps make us more prepared and ready.
Definitely.
Absolutely. So Hannah, can you talk us through negotiating a stadium naming right deal, and how many potential companies were you negotiating with at the time, and what's usually like the time frame for a deal like that?
So a naming rights deal could take anywhere from, I mean, once you reach, so let me stop for 1 second. You don't negotiate with more than one partner. So your sales team is out pitching companies to be the naming rights partner. And once you come to some sort of like, yes, we're interested, we want this deal, then, because you already generally know the price at which you have to price that. So it's not like something where you're already negotiating with multiple partners. So once you have the partner, then you start negotiating the contract, which most naming rights contracts are probably about 100 pages. So they're fairly complex deals. And usually in a deal that big, you're probably going to have both the GCs of the 2 companies, the team and the naming rights partner, as well as outside counsel on both sides, which, as we talk about negotiation, always introduces different dynamics when you're talking about a multi-person negotiation on each side. So oftentimes you'll see when you have outside counsel involved in any negotiation, they may be a bit more of the bad cop and the internal counsel may be a bit more of the good cop. And so that deal, I think from start to finish was probably, we were actually in a rush. I think we did it in like 3 months. And it was like arduous 3 months. And timing is obviously another thing that's really critical in negotiations, right? Is there a time deadline? It is human nature to not get things done until you are almost at a deadline. And so how timing works for each side is often a huge leverage point. And in our case, it was probably a little bit more their leverage point than ours. But understanding, I think, all those dynamics is really important in any type of deal that you're doing.
Thank you. So for my final question before I open up the floor, so everyone in the audience can ask, and you guys touched on it in the beginning, but we'll wrap it up with this. Since, you know, as we said, sports law is a very competitive field, and, you know, mostly men are in the field. What advice would you give to women who would want to enter sports law, or in general, any law, or in general, becoming a sports agent. And I know you guys, mentioned mentorship, and having a tight knit circle and a good group supporting you. But is there anything else that you would suggest or advise anyone trying to get into both fields?
I would recommend just networking as much as possible, particularly in the sports industry. It's a very small world. You see the same people over and over and over again. So, even just asking questions, do you have any opportunities available with your firm? Do you know of anybody who's hiring? Those sorts of conversations. I have those with people every single day. And whenever we do have something arise, I always keep those people in mind. Or internships, I know they're not super sexy, but oftentimes if we have a position available, we look to our previous interns who did a kick-ass job. So I think it's really, really important to network and communicate and have as many conversations as possible. Obviously, it's been a little bit difficult with the current climate, but I think things are, going to be changing a little bit this year. So that would be my biggest piece of advice for sure.
I'm going to jump in. I think just having the self-belief, knowing that you can do it, especially being a female in this industry, is very important. Somewhat being assertive a little bit. Squeaky wheel gets the oil, respectfully again. But, and that goes along with the networking thing too. Continue to build your Rolodex. I'm dating myself by saying that, but continue to build your iPhone contacts. Follow up with them, maybe get a mentor, definitely get an internship. I can't speak for the two other ladies on the call, but I have a couple of mentors, in not just in this field, but a different other, a couple other fields that you always want to be able to bounce ideas off of, or maybe something came up and you just want an outsider's perspective for sure. And just grind so hard, and just, again, but know that you can do this and that you belong, and that you can just show up every day and have an open mind and be willing to learn, because you don't know what you don't know. But just that self-confidence is huge in this arena for sure.
I co-sign on everything Savannah and Samantha just said.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. That's the last of our questions that we have. So we'll open it up to the rest of the Zoom chat. So you can, raise your hand, or you can put it in the chat. Either works. So I see we have one raised hand, Sienna Jones. If you want to go ahead and ask your question, you're more than welcome.
Okay, hopefully everyone can hear me. We've been having some crazy weather. But I first want to say thank you to all of you. And I was so excited when I found out about this, about Samantha, because I'm from Alexandria. So kind of hearing your name in Baltimore and in the news is awesome. So I'm really excited.
Yay. East Coast.
Yeah. But my question is, I'm in the second year of my master's program and want to sit for next year's exam. So any advice or tips on like study guides or what to study? I know the CBA is really big, but any guidance there?
Definitely. A lot of it was, like Savannah was saying, osmosis. So I was in the office of the agency for about a year before I sat for the test, I should say. So being able to be in some of these conversations, I'm obviously not negotiating at that point, but hearing kind of what's going on and understanding and asking a lot of questions. Some of the times you can't find yourself in such situations. There are study guides online. I know I took a peek, honestly, and this is probably going to push narrative a little bit, but at Inside the League, I know a lot of agents look at that. They have their own study guide, and I just would ideally look at that. But I think I took a full summer, maybe even a couple more months than that, as soon as we got those study materials. And the mentality is, what's one day of hanging out with your friends versus the rest of your life, right? And it's just studying and understanding and asking your peers questions. If it's somebody who's already within the role that you are trying to obtain, and something pops up that you don't know about, or it's weird or funky, whatever, don't be afraid to ask questions. don't be afraid to ask questions for sure. Again, I like to say the squeaky wheel gets the oil respectfully.
And from my perspective, I completely agree with all of that, but the NFLPA does a great job of sending the source materials. And that for me is all I needed to do to study to prepare myself for the exam. So reviewing, studying, like you mentioned, I was very diligent in my studies. And then, your CBA, you can take it with you in the exam. So I had probably 5,000 little sticky notes helping to note particular
side note,
items.
it's open book. It's open,
Right,
they
okay,
allow it
yes,
for
okay.
open book, but you need to study first. You need to know where everything is and understand, because it's a lot of situational questions.
Right.
So even though you're open book, and I mean, I remember being in the seminar, so it's a 2-day seminar, and then you take the test after the second day, and people were just looking at the materials then, because they review the materials, because they're relying on the fact that it's open book. That ain't gonna work. Like it is. I mean, Savannah, what was the percentage of passing rate? It was something crazy, like
I
I'm
was
gonna say
thinking
like
30% is what I was.
yeah, it was high 20s. So definitely take the time, take the due diligence, read all the materials that are given to you. Again, what's one day versus the rest of your life, right?
Yeah. And listen during the exam or during the
Yes.
seminar. Just listen. They give you most of the answers if you just listen.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great question. So we have a hand up from Bailey. So you can go ahead and ask your question, Bailey.
Hi guys. Thankfully I saw this on Instagram. I'm from Oklahoma, way out here. My kind of question is, I grew up with a sports background, played college basketball. I love it. In law is my second year of law school. My difficulty I find is I'm in Oklahoma, obviously don't have a lot of, opportunities for internships around here. I mean, what is y'all's advice? I'm sure you grew up or you went to law school in bigger cities. I'm just trying to figure out where I can get that experience, because I mean, there's not very many opportunities, like I said, here in Oklahoma, and just, tips on, what I should do. I'm obviously going to buy, your guided journal, but I need some advice on what to do, because I mean, I really would love to, kind of get my hands dirty and figure out if this is like really, what I want to do with my law degree. So just any advice would be super helpful.
I kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, but I would just encourage you to reach out to anybody and everybody in the industry to get feedback. So, people hit me up on LinkedIn and Instagram pretty much daily, and I take as many of those phone calls as I can, just more of an informational session to walk you through what a day is like, particular things that we encounter on a daily basis. And I think that that's pretty helpful in determining if this is really something that you might want to do long term. So obviously I'm not the end all be all, but if you have conversations with 15 different people, that gives you a pretty good base of information to guide your decisions as you think about this. So, I would say just reach out to as many people as you can. You can do phone calls and Zooms and be equally as big of a network as if you were in a bigger city, in my opinion.
I agree with that. Yeah, I think anything you can do to get an internship, and obviously you need to be willing to move kind of anywhere geographically early in your career.
I second all of it.
I'll add one thing. Kelly Masters is an NFL agent who is based out of Oklahoma, who spoke at our law school last year. So I'd recommend reaching out to her.
Thank you guys. And actually, yeah, one of my classmates is actually working for her now. Thank you guys so much.
Okay, we have hand raised from Shakina.
Hi, I'm Shekinah. Yeah, I actually have two questions, and so I guess you can choose which one you're going to answer. But my first one is, how do you negotiate like your salary slash like percentage that you're going to get paid to make sure that you're being paid as at the same standard as your male counterparts? So that's the first question. And I guess the second question would be, when you're recruiting players, like what's your approach? Just when they're on campus, I'm thinking there are a lot of girls that are usually trying to get their attention. And so how do you, get them to take you serious when you're trying to recruit them?
I'm gonna take the second question first. I kind of alluded to being mistaken, right? Sometimes when the field is like the player, wife or girlfriend or something like that. When you are a female recruiting, a male collegiate athlete coming out of college, there's a way that you have to brand yourself, whereas you come off, knowing everything about the industry, right? And you have to come off as obviously very professional, and you kind of have to have an air about you that's going to separate you from, I guess, some of the other maybe noise that's kind of going on around. We use our social media, I would say, somewhat as a portfolio. I don't even think, honestly, I post a ton of personal anymore. A lot of it is job related, because these are what these guys are seeing. That's how you're getting connected. Sometimes, or more often than not, even it's you have a mutual connection and things like that. But it's always coming across as professional, knowing about the industry, and just being able to tell these guys, like, I'm going to be able to take care of you. I'm going to be able to put you in the best situation possible. I'm going to be able to support you as much as possible, no matter what the gender is. And what was the first question? What was that one again?
It was in relation to just making sure that you're paid, like I said, salary / percentage. Like, don't lowball me because I'm a woman. Like, I want what the men are getting. So that's
I mean, I just think so. Within the job and within the role within our companies, you're gonna show your value, and you're gonna put that forth, and you're gonna push what your value says monetarily. As far as contracts with guys, there's actually a cap where all agencies get paid a percentage, and it caps off at 3%. So depending on which one you're talking about, for within, your own salary and payroll, whatever cut you get within your own job, again, you essentially have to show your worth. But I think that's male or female, honestly, and be indisposable.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Shina. And did you guys want to answer or? Okay, so next we have a hand raised from Charles. So Charles, if you want to ask your question, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, ladies, for taking the time out of your schedules to have this conversation. My question was in regards for the boss NFL agents. When recruiting, one, do you all have the athlete agent license, and do you purchase those? And then two, for the recruits, when do you start approaching them in terms of having conversations or beginning the conversations? Is it freshman year, junior year, or how does that work? Thank you.
So to become a certified NFL agent, you have to pass that exam, which we mentioned a little bit earlier at the end of the 2-day seminar. So we both have our certifications, and then you have to be certified in each respective state, and then a lot of times in each respective school as well. So there are a lot of different layers to it. And, obviously the NCAA regulates a lot of these things. So we have to make sure we're always in compliance and have our insurance up to date, and everything, in order with our licenses. So yeah, it's definitely a process, but we have to keep our certification by going to agent seminar every year. So we constantly keep fresh on all the materials and make sure we know what we're doing. So it's very vetted. We obviously put a lot of time and diligence into making sure we're on the up and up with all of that. And then the recruiting question, I think it's just very individual. It depends on the particular player and his specific process. So, a lot of players have their schools regulate their process, so we're not able to speak with them or their family or whoever's running their processes until a certain point in their career. But since players have to play in college for 3 years, we usually aren't looking at earlier talent, freshman and sophomore years, unless there's a red shirt situation. I mean, we obviously see it, but we don't typically recruit until a little bit later, once we see how successful they likely will be in the NFL. So I think just because you're a 5-star recruit out of high school doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a fantastic player in college or beyond. So, we do a lot of research to make sure we're targeting the right players, and it's a very scientific process.
Yeah, I mean, same basically. It's different for each player. You know, it's some, I want to say that, this specific instance, my guy here, he was at Kansas and I knew who he was at Kansas, and he was okay at Kansas. And then, you know, went over to Virginia Tech and balled out. And that's kind of one of the ones that you eyeball and say, all right, now is kind of the time that I want to have a conversation. But, we're always looking at guys when they start coming in and where they're playing and things like that. And it's, you, like Savannah said, you're going to eyeball them early on, maybe hit them up on social, a quick introduction, but there's not much that you can really do at that point, until, and you're kind of just spinning wheels a little bit too, depending on the athlete or the player, until you're starting to get into the game. And, you do want to start those basic lines of communication and relationships, but it all depends on timing, the player, and everything like that, for sure.
Thank you.
I have a question for Hannah. Not everyone's path is the same to becoming a general counsel of a team, but many law students, I don't know if I'd call it a misconception, but think, oh, you have to go work in big law first or at a certain type of law firm and then transition over to the team side. What different career paths would you say you've seen, or how would you recommend to law students navigating if they want to eventually work for a team?
Yeah, I would say most general counsels practiced at a large law firm early in their careers. How long they did that for, I was there for a very short time, really varies. There are some people who become a general counsel at 50 after representing a club as its outside counsel for 10, 15, 20 years at a firm. There's other people who may come in at a more junior level who've only practiced at a firm for maybe 3 years. And they may come in as an associate counsel, be promoted to an associate general counsel or a deputy general counsel, and eventually be promoted to the general counsel. So I would say it does vary, but it is pretty uncommon for somebody to not have any law firm background.
And Hannah, I have a question for you, and just for any law students on here. And you mentioned you've taken a negotiations class. And most law students, like for example, I'm on the negotiations and mediation team at FIU. What other teams or organizations or maybe associations would you recommend for law students to be a part of or to take? Obviously, I feel like contracts is a given. That's what we take our foundation courses. But any other classes or things that we should be looking out for?
Well, the thing about sports is it's an industry and not a practice area. And so really you end up taking classes in all different practice areas in law school. And if your goal is to be a general counsel at a team, then that will all become useful to you, because being a GC at a team is like being the town lawyer in a small town. Like, you need to know a little bit of everything. And so you can go different directions. Like, I always encourage people, like, you should pursue the practice area that you enjoy the most, because this is a very competitive industry. And the reality is you won't be your best at something you don't really enjoy. So if you love litigation, but you're like, oh, more people in this field come from a corporate background, I should become a corporate lawyer. Like, don't do that if you hate it, because you won't be the best and then you won't get into the field you want to get into. And there's enough jobs in sports in every different practice area. There's people who all they do is IP work. There's people all they are is litigators and they work in sports. There's people all they do is contracts and they work at Gatorade with major teams and leagues, etc. So I would say pursue the practice areas you enjoy. There's no wrong classes to take in law school. The more hands-on classes you can take, and I think this is true regardless of what type of lawyer you want to be, is really helpful. So to the extent there are negotiations classes, to the extent there are contract drafting classes, law school tends to be more litigation focused, and it also tends to be more theoretical and less hands-on. So to the extent that you have, to the extent that you have clinics and things of that nature, I think that it's helpful to do that. Also, that is somewhat of a work emergency, so I'm going to go on mute and no video for a second. Sorry.
Does anyone else have any questions for our panelists?
Can I jump in real quick and say something? If you guys, anybody on here or anybody who might have missed, come on late, whatever, want to connect or reach out, Twitter is good for me. If you have any other questions, maybe you forgot or anything else, because I also have a feeling that he's about to walk out here shortly. So I gotta catch him. But Agent Sank on Twitter, happy to answer any questions or chat or, you know, whatever you guys need, let us know.
Savannah, do you want to add anything before we wrap it up?
No, I just thank you guys so much for having me. I had a good time and excited to be a part of all of this. And like Samantha mentioned, feel free to reach out to me. I do have a Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, just whatever, you can find me. Happy to help however I can.
Yeah, thanks so much, Josh, for having us. Very cool. And whether it's male or female, you know, we're happy to answer any questions. So we just want to help out.
Well, thank you all for taking the time to speak with us here today. Savannah, Samantha, Hannah, if you're still there, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And for you guys being a part of our first ever Sports Entertainment Fashion Art Law Society Symposium. We hope if you guys are ever in the Miami area that you are welcome to stop by our law school and speak again. We would love to have you. And thank you.
Thank you guys so much. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. So it means a lot to us. Have a good rest of your weekend.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you.